Hi, and welcome to Present Intentions. Intention Matters Unplugged. This is a YouTube show related to the Intentism arts movement, which is an arts collective that is made up of artists and writers and musicians and poets and philosophers. But we all maintain one thing. We're interested in the interplay between the artist's intentions and that creative process and then the final work. And I'm joined today by musician Mark Heffernan, and we interviewed him about a week ago, who's also known as Pocket Lint, and you can hear more about his music in Bandcamp. And we spoke about one thing particularly last time, and that's his newish work that he's done called Themes for Silkerville. And Themes for Silkerville is a soundtrack for a fictional movie. And we spoke about his inspirations. We played a little bit of the music. And one thing that Mark said was he was specifically inspired by something called Moss Side Story. Now, Moss Side Story is another soundtrack for a fictional movie a few years ago by the father. They were all the father figure of this idea of writing fictional soundtracks. And that man, we're going to be really pleased to welcome in a moment, because we're going to be spending the rest of the show interviewing him, is Mr. Barry Adamson. So let me bring in both Mark and Barry now. Here we go. Wonderful. So let me just introduce to all those are watching Barry. Now, I'm sure he doesn't need any introduction, but just to say a few things about him, because we're thrilled to have him here. We're very, very excited. So Barry is a Renaissance man in many ways. He's a pop and rock musician. He's a composer. He's a writer. He's a successful photographer. He's a filmmaker. As a musician, he worked with many extremely successful groups, including Magazine and The Birthday Party and Nick Cave and The Bad Seeds, amongst many others. As a writer, he's written a novella called Made a Hell that won the Best Short Story Award at the Piemonte Noir Italian Festival. So incredibly successful with that as well. And then mainly as a musician. That's why we're thrilled to have him today. He's done amazing things. In particular, what we're interested in, as I say, is his soundtrack called Moss Side Story, which became a kind of platform to help him to write soundtracks for various other films. And he's worked with some of the most major successful directors in the world today, including David Lynch, Oliver Stone, and Danny Boyle. So welcome, Barry.
Thank you very much for that introduction.
Thank you so much for being here. And Mark, if I ask you to kick us off, please.
Yeah. So hi there. I saw, I saw, because I follow you on Twitter, you've got a new book out, which you described as having this kind of cinematic noir style. So
yeah,
where did, for you, the love of kind of film noir come from? Because I got it first from reading Chandler and then kind of working my way through films and then kind of the 80s neo-noir stuff.
Right. Got you. Well, I think for me, it was actually much earlier in my childhood, sort of wandering around the streets of Moss Side and adjoining areas. And there was an atmosphere there. And it was sort of like a black and white, well, as I say on the cover of Moss Side Story, a black and white world. And I used to sort of, walk around a lot and spend time just sort of observing things and the way the light sort of fell. And it was only later, really, like, as you say, like in the books, like David Goodis, Raymond Chandler, and later on, say, David Peace, Jim Thompson, a bit earlier, that I started to make that connection where the atmosphere in the streets was from somewhere else, from something that was going on, whether that be the characters that were there and the way the sort of the interplay of the characters and the location. And so that's what became a noir feeling for me, sort of very early on. And I guess it was sort of joining up the dots a bit later.
That's interesting, because my childhood would have been very much more Village of the Damned. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Shropshire, and there was definitely no sense of noir there. So do you want to tell me a little bit about, because the book, because I haven't read it yet, and it's only just out, isn't it?
That's right. It just came out last week. Yeah.
So how is that kind of, because it's not a traditional autobiography, is it? You're not just telling your life story. You're sort of.
No, well, I mean, I wanted to sort of play to my strengths, I suppose, and having a sort of I guess a noir vocabulary, if you like, in the work. I thought it would be an idea to actually put the story across in that way, as though right from the off, it's almost like a bizarre detective novel with myself, I guess, as the central character. And for me, it made sense as the only way to write it, really, because I mean, the golden rule, I think, is like write about what you know, and so therefore, I sort of took the idea of self-investigation as the sort of heart, the dark heart, if you like, and using sort of influences, around detective writing and around the sort of the difficulties that some of the difficulties that happen in my life, and to describe them kind of head on, to sort of meet them head on. Like there's that very noir idea where you open a door, it's like, damn it, it's like the thing is staring you in the face, and then you maybe run from it and you have to find these other clues to piece it together. So I sort of decided to do it that way, and that's the thing that would perhaps make it interesting, rather than another musician's life, of which there's lots of us. And so I just thought, like that's my native tongue, if you like, the noir sort of vernacular. So why not use it in this instance as well?
I think it's a really interesting approach because, as someone who grew up being a music obsessee, I read lots and lots of rock autobiographies, and most of them are quite interesting up until the point the person gets famous, at which point the next sort of 200 pages are just, and then I went to this airport, and then I went to this airport, and I shagged all of these people, and it's tedious.
Exactly. It's very hard sort of not do that, and to keep it sort of a place where you're still kind of staying with your central theme, if you like. So I had all these like sort of things to go off, and the cinematic end of it was the structure, really. So I had this sort of Hitchcockian idea of like, a 3-act sort of narrative that sort of speeds along in the second act, and does head towards a crisis climax, as it were, and then we kind of see how it unfolds. So there was, there's a little bit of like, and then I went to this party or whatever, but a lot of it's like sort of quite like, wow, like stark sort of facts. And I wrote it. I made a decision early on to write it in the present tense. So you're sort of with me, like even if I'm sort of 5 years old, you're with me at 5 years old, rather than when I was 5 years old. I went for my mum took me to the shops, and it's like we go and do this, and this happens, and hopefully it sort of puts the reader in my shoes as well, as you sort of go along with it. And the main anchor of the whole thing is music. So even on those noiry streets, you're hearing sort of the beat from the sort of strip club down the road, boom, cha, boom, boom, cha, boom, 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 boom. This sort of atmosphere is around right from the very beginning. And as I sort of start to head into sort of troubled, straits, it's music that always, it's a bit of a cliche, it's music that always pulls me back into a sort of grounded place, in order to sort of carry on and sort of go through whatever it is, whatever trials and tribulations are thrown my way.
It's really interesting that you just kind of did that drum beat, because I was going to say a lot of your solo work has a real jazz influence, and I was wondering, does that come from film scores, things like The Man with the Golden Arm, and that kind of big band jazz, which Vittorio is a big fan of, that was kind of prevalent in 50s and 60s scores?
Yeah. Again, it is that sort of my early ear connecting the dots later on, and getting sort of one day to see The Man with the Golden Arm on the big screen and thinking, wow, that's amazing, and the music is amazing, and it reminds me of something, and it is that sort of place down the road that was stomping out that beat, so it was kind of real for me as well, and it made the story sort of a bit more real as well. Like, and also my dad was a jazz fan, and so the music that was played around the house, well, there was my dad playing jazz and my sister playing Motown, and my mum sort of singing sort of slightly classical And so all of these things were sort of going on. But I guess the father's influence and like seeing him sort of like, you know, listening to this stuff, you know, like late night spot at Ronnie Scott's, and you know, seeing how it did something, you know, it changed him. You know, he plugged into this other world, and I was like, wow, what is this? Because there was these amazing sounds coming